YouTube, it's me, Root Beer. I'm definitely not doing a second take of this video because I forgot to wear headphones the first time. So Farfa recently had a subathon, and one of the segments was reviewing Vanguard cards with Solemn, so since the edited VOD just came out on his YouTube channel, I figured we'd take the bounty of free content and just react to it.
YouTube! Welcome back to another collab from the subathon. We are here joined by who?
Solemn. I'm a competitive Vanguard player, but I'm also a content creator for both Vanguard and Yu-Gi-Oh!
So, what are we going to be doing today?
We're going to be rating Vanguard cards, and because we're running out of time, I'm not even explaining the rules, so...
Farfa also just thought it would be funnier if he just didn't know anything about Vanguard while he was going through this.
So,
Sure.
I'm going to read these cards and I'm going to decide if they're good or not, and then you have to tell me if I'm right. Alright, this is...
I see Solemn's Grand Blue bias is already showing through here.
Sorry, you can just revive 5 monsters from your grave?
Yes.
Oh yeah, and it looks like Solemn just blurred out the reminder text on how striding works. I assume just to, like, minimize the amount of information, and because this text is on a lot of the strides, it would just get really repetitive.
And buff them with plus 10,000? This is literally Return from the Different Dimension on legs. Or rather, what would be the equivalent? Soul Charge on legs, but you get a battle phase? I'm gonna say that this card is really good. Really, really good.
This is very mediocre.
What? How? Summoning 5 guys from the grave? This is mediocre.
So, to give more context, Solemn explained in the actual stream that Grand Blue wants to actually, like, be doing things. Let's just scroll back a little bit to get the card art. So, Solemn explained during the stream that Grand Blue wants to be doing things, so in the context of modern Grand Blue as it is right now, a lot of your main deck monsters already just call a bunch of things from the drop zone, so you don't need any additional help reviving cards. In the context of G era, when this card first came out, I think it was better back then, because you had things like Nightstorm and Negrobone that could combo off and form this endless conga line of assholes. So I think modern Grand Blue doesn't really do that in the same way, so Galleon has kind of fallen off, and even when it was introduced, just being GB8 meant it was way too slow to come up in most standard games.
This is very mediocre.
Light Elemental Honoli.
Yes.
So it's all rear guards can attack the Vanguard in the 5th or more battle of that turn, unless something is paid. You must pay when you attack. All rear guards cannot attack the Vanguard in the 5th or more
card,
battle of that turn. So unless you're swarming the field with like 20 monsters, that just seems a bit useless. When this unit is placed on R, choose a face-up card in your damage zone and turn it face down.
Okay, so to explain the Vanguard rules, because Farfa didn't bother learning them, the way you pay for things in Vanguard is to take cards in your damage zone and turn them face down. It's called a counterblast. It's what this little purple marker here signifies. So every time you take a damage, you have the option during your turns to, like, turn your cards in damage face down to pay resources, basically. So this card is telling you to pay taxes.
I don't know how big the numbers in power scaling is, and I don't know if this is a big beater or not, but in terms of Yu-Gi-Oh, this is a beat stick.
I guess to contextualize Vanguard numbers in terms of Yu-Gi-Oh numbers, maybe just chop a 0 off. I think that gets you close enough.
I'm not really seeing why this is good. Unless, like, making taxes being paid is strong on the 5th battle. So I'm gonna say that this card sucks.
So this card is sometimes, depending on the format, insane, and sometimes completely garbage.
Yeah, it is completely format dependent. I think when this card first came out, it was directly on the heels of things like Full Power Time Leap and Night Rose, decks that could just casually make 8 attacks in one turn. So this was very powerful for being able to stop that, but then the meta kind of shifted, decks didn't make as many attacks, and then, you know, towards the end of G era, decks got crazier and crazier, and the number of attacks increased again, so this card kind of became relevant again. And then nowadays, most people just use this as a form of disruption, so if your opponent has already committed a bunch of attacks, you can call this mid-battle phase, you know, starting from the 5th attack, and now your opponent has to start counterblasting for it. Grand Blue, the clan we just looked at with the ship, is actually very good at using this, so they'd usually tech one copy of this just to have it.
This is Chronovizer Heritage. Oh boy, grade 4.
I blurred out some reminder text.
15,000 plus power auto. Choose 4 other face-up Zodiac time beasts from your G zone and turn them face down. So I assume that's like resetting the cards in your grave to use again at some point, probably?
So imagine if you like use the link monster, it would go straight back to your extra and then go face up, and now you can no longer use it. But this
it goes back to the face-up extra deck. Oh, and then we can pen summon the link monster is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Master Rule 6 leaked, okay. So just in general, I feel like just resetting extra deck guys sort of is like probably really good, right? I mean, you get to like use the guys again if you can't use them again in Vanguard, right? Whereas this guy lets you use them again. So this is either a big debate or it's like actually insane to be able to just reuse your like other cards from your deck. Yeah, it's one or the other. It's like really good or really bad. So I don't know how good it is to recur previous boss monsters, but I assume it's probably... I'm gonna say this is a really good card.
So
this is just the Yu-Gi-Oh! Brainworms, right? Like, is this how MBT feels when he watches Master Saga? Like, this man really just looked at this card, saw the line of text to turn 4 cards face down, and just stopped thinking after that. He did not register anything else about the card. He just saw, recycle your extra deck, and was like, alright, my mind is made up. I don't need to know anything else about this card.
So when it came out in 2018, it was a very strong card, but now it is too slow. But what's interesting is you thought of the flipping 4 face down rather than the fact that this card reads you get an additional turn.
Oh, wait, hang on. That's actually pretty important. So this is really broken, but it's been power crept.
Only Farfa.
Yes, exactly.
All right, I like this one. This is a grade 2, 10,000 attack, Choco Love Heart Lizalette. Okay, so...
we had to include one, you know?
Hand, it can be called as a grade 1. When placed, look at the top card of your deck and call it to R or put it into your soul. Okay.
So Soul is another resource in Vanguard. Think of it as Xyz materials that go underneath your Vanguard, so... Every time you put a card into your soul, that would be attaching a material, and soul blasting a card is, you know, detaching.
Interesting. Playing this turn 1 to be able to, like, look at the top card and call it or place it? I mean, isn't this just like tour guide, basically? That seems kind of good. So, I feel like this is probably bad.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah, I think this is bad.
Okay.
I just don't even.
This card is broken. So it happens so quickly and it is so high value from turn 1 that the second this card came out, you essentially got like a high value good stuff version of Bermuda, and ever since.
So to add on to this, in the context of Vanguard, you can't really miss with this card. On the stream, when Farfa was kind of thinking this through and waffling about whether it's good or bad, one of the points he made was that you only look at the top card, so it can be very inconsistent, but in Vanguard that doesn't really matter. A lot of your cards just have value. You will hit something useful most of the time, and then, you know, later on, after this card was introduced, Bermuda got more tools to return things to the hand. That's kind of always been their primary playstyle. So in that context, being able to recycle this card to just get free pluses on subsequent turns, or if you hit something that doesn't necessarily need to stay on the field, like a trigger or a perfect guard, you just bounce it to your hand and get defensive value from it. So you just can't miss with this card. It's just completely crazy. When it first came out, the game was still kind of in a slower state, and this, alongside all of the melody stuff, just represented an unparalleled level of card advantage. It was completely dominant at that time, and this card is still a staple in Bermuda now.
Since then, this card has been ran at 4 in Bermuda Triangle.
So I feel like this is one of the few cards in the deck that isn't a monster, right? This is a spell of sorts, I guess. Ingenious Tactics, Book of Strong Armor. Draw 3, and 3 of your front row units get plus 10,000 to the end of the turn.
It's like a super
but it's grade 3, so I guess it's slow in that sense, but it is draw 3 and buff your field. So I'm gonna say that this is probably maybe one of the best orders. I don't know how fast the game is, but it's definitely not something you can do like turn 1, right? So, okay, I'm gonna say that this card sucks.
So you're semi-right in the sense that this card has always sucked and been completely unplayable until a deck was able to cheat it out without paying the costs.
Yep. And that card is now limited to 1, so the deck is not very good anymore, thank God. I think Gridora is still awful, but that's a completely different discussion, and that card isn't really being talked about anyway, so...
Okay, so that makes sense, right? If you could just ignore the costs. Alright.
Yes.
This is like the one Vanguard card I know because Twitch chat linked it to me like last year, and I'm pretty sure they spoiled it. I think this card is absolutely broken.
Yes. The way I would once again make it a Yu-Gi-Oh reference, imagine there's a new master rule and it says you can only special summon after turn 4. But then this card is released and says discard 1 vanilla, you may now special summon from turn 1 and also draw 2. And this card and its effects cannot be negated.
Okay, so Zarzan really is just kind of a only in Vanguard type of deal. You know, the reasons why this card is so good are very specific to the mechanics of Vanguard. To try and give a really quick explanation, there is a mechanic called GB, or Generation Break, in the game. It is an artificial time gate based on just how many cards are face up in your extra deck or on the Vanguard circle. So, if you have one extra deck monster either on the Vanguard or in the extra deck face up, that's GB1. You know, if you have one on your Vanguard, one face up, that's GB2, so on and so forth. A lot of card effects, when this card came out, were gated behind GB, and a lot of the strongest cards in the game had very high GB numbers, like GB3 at least. So those cards wouldn't be online until, like, turn 6 at least. So, the fact that this card, for a very low cost, at a very early phase in the game, being able to just turn a G unit face up, and unlock all of your GB locked ability long before they were ever intended to be online, completely broke the pace of the game. I think when this card came out, some Japanese players got together and ran hundreds of simulations on this card, and decks that did not run Zarzan compared to decks that did only had a 2% win rate. It was absolutely ridiculous. It was like the one time that we got a trending hashtag was ban Zarzan. And Vanguard is like the 7th most popular card game in the world, so nothing we do ever trends, which should tell you just how crazy this was.
Oh, wow, okay. Next one. I mean, this thing is shiny. It's called Evil God. There's like 20,000 words here. 15,000 plus power. This card just looks broken, but let's have a look. It is grade 4. When a card is put into your soul, all of your front row units get plus 3,000. Search your deck for up to 2 cards. Put them in your soul and shuffle your... Oh, I like how it says shuffle. So this guy sounds like tour guide for 2 monsters, doesn't negate the effects, and gains their effects. I'm gonna say that this is like one of the most broken cards ever made in Vanguard. Like, this seems unreal.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, yeah, it's really hard to dispute this card. I don't know how anyone can read this and think that this is even remotely okay. A lot of people did try to defend it when there were calls to ban it, just because it was not the top deck of that format, which should tell you how crazy Premium was at the time, that a card that just says, copy 2 things unconditionally is not good enough to be the best deck. It was maybe like the 3rd best. So there were 2 other things at least that were way crazier than this, but regardless, this card is still just fundamentally broken and should not remain around, and has been banned, and it should stay on the ban list forever.
Right, this broke the
Okay,
game
right.
multiple times.
Wow.
Holy text, Batman.
This half of this card is text, so if statistically this is just probably going to be good. Eradicator, Vowing Saber Dragon reverse. Lock one of your rear guards. Your opponent chooses a card, each from their rear guard's hand, and drop and binds them. So what does that mean? I guess they just can't use those cards anymore?
Mine is like the banish zone, basically.
Oh, wow. This already seems really good, and he has more effects. When your opponent...
So it wasn't explained, but locking, you just turn one of your cards face down and it just cannot do anything. So think of it like Floodgate Trap Hole, but only until the end of your turn, or until the end of the turn of the card's owner. So when you lock a card, it just turns face down. You cannot interact with it. You can't call over it. You can't retire it, except for like one very specific case, but we don't need to get into that. So for all intents and purposes, locking a card just turns it into a roadblock that just takes up space.
So I get to rip a card out of their hand and their deck, and I get buffed. If your opponent didn't banish a card, it gets 10k instead. When this unit attacks, if you have one or more cards with the vowing in its card's name in soul, choose one of your rear guards and up it. What does that symbol mean?
If you attack, your rear guard goes to defense, essentially. And then only when it's back in attack, it can attack again. It has the Boral Sword effect.
I mean, I would just explain it like tapping cards in Magic, right? Like, I think most people understand that concept easier than trying to go this roundabout way of explaining it.
This is grade 3. It's Trish for like the hand and deck. It buffs your field, and it's Boral Sword. Like, this is absurd, right? Like, this is absolutely insane.
Is that your final answer?
That is my final answer.
In the format it was designed for, it's pretty mid.
What?
I can explain this. This deck just doesn't have card advantage. Like, I think Vowing Reverse on his own is extremely powerful. Like, the Trishula effect is pretty good. It gains a decent amount of power, and you have, like, other cards to kind of follow up. They gain more power on their own. You can chain additional binds to get more power. Offensively, I think the deck is fine. The problem is, you know, you still need to be able to guard your opponent's attacks. Decks rarely can just OTK turn 3. So, you know, the fact that you consistently end your turn with like 4 or 5 cards in your hand, and all of the things that draw cards are either on hit or require you to discard or minus in some way, means that the deck never truly has enough defensive power to really last through the top meta decks. Also, Steam Maidens, the current best deck in the format as of this recording, interacts with the bind zone, so that's just another ding against it.
How?
It just doesn't do that much. It's not bad, but it's like, you know, part of a rogue deck, let's say.
Yo, this looks like a Pokemon. Dragon of Death Gardenzoa. When this unit is placed, you may pay the cost. If you do draw a card, choose a card from your hand, call it, and until the end of the turn, this unit cannot be chosen by card effects, and its attack becomes 99999 constantly, and also when this unit deals damage to your opponent's Vanguard, your opponent loses. Okay, so we have a...
Nah, I wouldn't compare this to Exodia. What would be, like, a Yu-Gi-Oh! Equivalent of... I guess, like, Victory Dragon or all those other, like, match-winning prize cards, where if it, like, deals a hit to your opponent, you, like, win the game automatically. Although, in the case of those, like, win the match, so the entire, like, best of 3. So, I guess there's no, like, real direct Yu-Gi-Oh! Parallel to this card.
Win condition here, which, you know, they can be debates. I can't really explain, but I just feel like a win condition is almost always gimmicky in any game, unless it's like just the meta, right? Like a specific like burn FTK. I'm gonna go with my gut and say that this is actually probably just bad.
Yeah, you're basically right. This card is mediocre.
So yeah, this card is not that good. Even in the anime, you know, you could just perfect guard it. That's how they beat this card. You know, the villain was like, aha, behold my 0th Dragonzoa. It gives one of my rear guards quintuple 9 power, and then when you take the hit, you lose. And then, you know, the guy that she was playing is like, alright, cool. Perfect guard? Ah! Who could have seen this obvious outcome? This card is really mediocre. Like, even when people found a way to, like, stop you from just perfect guarding it, it was sometimes still not enough. Because this card is also very slow just for its summoning conditions. And Solemn, I don't think really went into this, but the 0th dragons also have a failure condition. So when they go back to your extra deck at the end of the turn, you just remove your entire extra deck from the game. So it just completely turns off your best offensive engine, as well as some of your defensive options, because there are extra deck cards whose sole purpose is to defend you. And like I explained earlier with Zarzan, a lot of cards need the extra deck to even turn on their effects. So if you go into this card and it fails, then you've just completely bricked your entire deck.
Right, this card is mediocre.
All right, we're on the last card. Oh, I think I've like seen the artwork of this, and it's like a Vanguard space tour guide. I love it. If I could just arrest you, this turmoil would be quelled. Oh, wow, please arrest me. When this unit is placed on field, cost 1/1 card with Seraph in its name. Your opponent chooses 2 cards, each from their hand, rear guards, and soul, and imprisons them in your prison. I assume that this is like a Seraph deck of sorts. I assume there's like a whole archetype of Seraph, right? Including her. Yeah, just by herself in isolation, I guess it seems like kind of slow because it's grade 4 and it takes a while to like rack up those prisons. This seems like for the deck it's made is like really, really strong. I don't know if it's like broken, but it's like a very, very important piece for Seraphs.
Yes, this card is really strong. It created the strongest deck the second it dropped for its given format, basically.
I don't know if I would call Prison like the strongest deck. I feel like Gravidia has more consistent top cuts, and you know, it actually has not shown up in top 8s nearly as often as you would expect for how powerful this card is on paper. Like, it is a good deck, and I would consider it like top tier. If you were looking to play a D standard deck, like Seraph is a pretty good investment, but it has never quite gotten to that point of being like the top best deck in the format.
Wow, that good, huh? So through this whole thing, have you showed me any of like the most broken card in Vanguard at all? Like, have I seen like the most broken card?
Yeah, probably Zarzan. It was the little blue.
Oh, the little blue dude.
Yes.
Oh, this is one of the best cards ever made. Like
this card is
could be
ridiculous.
the best card.
Yeah, I would argue this is the best card ever made.
All right.
So I will say about some of the cards that he chose, like, I think Solemn was trying to, like, bait Farfa a bit. A lot of the cards that weren't shown in this video were, like, cards designed to bait Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, so there were just, like, a bunch of Grand Blue things in there. He also showed Bendy, which I was not super in love with. I feel like that particular card being part of an engine means that, like, it's really hard to guess what it was good for just looking at the card in isolation, and I feel like he didn't explain that particular entry very well. But overall, it also feels like Solemn did not go for any, like, definitively Vanguard cards outside of, like, Zarzan and Bendy. You know, a lot of these cards are just things that you would look at and think they were generically good, even looking at it from a Yu-Gi-Oh! Standpoint. I think we could have gone for some other, like, really crazy things, like Dai Kaiser, or if you wanted a really funny card, like Glendios, stuff like that. Also, very iconic old cards, like Overlord, Phantom Blaster, all those guys.
Right, Maxim, thank you so much for doing this for me. This was way more interesting and fun than I thought it would be. How would you like to be plugged and give yourself...
Alright, so that's basically the end of this video. I thought it was a pretty fun segment, although I didn't fully agree with some of the choices that Solemn had, and, you know, some of his explanations were a little incomplete, which I think ultimately was just the subathon environment, right? Like, you can see here, there's barely 3 minutes left. So, you know, it wasn't perfect. I feel like there might have been, like, other cards that we could have shown that are more definitively Vanguard, but I do understand the idea that, like, you know, Farfa is a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, and he kind of chose cards that are easier to translate in terms of Yu-Gi-Oh! So, you know, for a subathon environment where you're trying to go very quickly, I think that fits. It would be interesting to see him do this again in a more calm environment where we can curate the cards a little better and maybe have some longer, more in-depth explanations, but, you know, I guess that remains for the future. Please hit us up. Hang on, let me go do this properly. Please notice me, senpai. There we go. So, that's going to be it for this reaction video. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.